Welp, it's finally here. Nebraska kicks off the start of their fall practice in only a couple days, and with that, the season is getting very close. So it's finally time for me to release the biggest video I've ever done on this channel, a comprehensive 2024 Nebraska football deep dive. We're going to be going over every single player on the team, graphics, statistics, predictions, and everything else you could ask for. So buckle up, folks. This is going to be a good one. So really quick, before we dive into it, please hit that like button. I've been working on this video for weeks and weeks on end. So if you could hit that one button, it would help me out a lot. And hey, if you're new here, my name is Wilson Dittman. I posted a video about Nebraska football and Nebraska recruiting every single day. So if you could hit that subscribe button, that would also help me out greatly if you don't want to miss out on any awesome Husker content. But without further ado, let's get into it, my deep dive for Nebraska football 2024. Well, every team has to start off with their coaching staff, and Nebraska is no different, led by their head coach, Matt Rhule, for the second year. Of course, Matt Rhule comes to Nebraska after a couple stints with the Temple Owls, Baylor Bears, and then most recently in the NFL with the Carolina Panthers. Now, last year was a little bit of a struggle for Matt Rhule's first campaign. Of course, the Huskers only won 5 games. But when you go back to why they lost those football games, it was very evident for only 3 reasons. Number one, they had a lack of quarterback play. 3 different starters throughout the year. Jeff Sims, of course, that was a debacle. Heinrich Haarberg, who graded out as one of the worst starting quarterbacks, and then Chubba Purdy for the last 2 games, who ended up transferring out. So they lost games because of their quarterback play. Number 2, the lack of special team success. They had a true freshman kicker, Tristan Alvano, who only completed 60% of his field goals. And then Brian Buschini, their starting punter, was one of the worst in Power 5 football. And then last but not least, the reason why they won only 5 games was because of some time management flaws, specifically in the fourth quarter, the lack of timeouts, the lack of situational awareness. And because of that, Nebraska had 5 one-score losses, 5 out of those 7. But that's something that's definitely going to turn around in 2024. Now, a lot of Nebraska's fan base loves Matt Rhule, and by a lot, I mean everybody, and for good reason. Matt Rhule is an old-school head coach. He's an old-school team builder type of guy. He's all about culture. He's all about high school recruiting. And in modern-day college football, it's really all about the transfer portal and getting guys for 1 or 2 years and then sending them to the league. Matt Rhule is not that way. Again, he builds old school, and honestly, that's going to be huge for Nebraska going forward. So Nebraska's culture also has been improving tremendously since the Scott Frost era, since the Mike Riley era. Of course, we know how bad it was over the last half decade for Nebraska, but Matt Rhule, Nebraska fans really believe he is a builder. He is a riser. So he grades as a B+ head coach in all of college football, and a lot of Nebraska fans expect to win some games this year. Now, looking at the coordinators for the Huskers, Marcus Satterfield coming into his second year with Nebraska. He came in from South Carolina most recently, and he grades as a C- offensive coordinator for Nebraska. He runs a pro-style offense, a little bit of a multiple offense as well. Now, looking at Marcus Satterfield in his performance last year for the Huskers, it was not very good, to say the least. A lot of Nebraska's fan base, they wanted him fired at the end of the year, but to be completely frank with you, there wasn't much he could do with the talent he was given within 1 year. Of course, the quarterback room was not his fault. What he inherited was one of the worst in all of Power 5 football. And then if you dive deep into some of the other positional groups, the running back room was hit hard by injury. Same with the wide receivers. Of course, the 3 best wideouts for Nebraska got injured and didn't end the year. So both of those rooms got decimated, and the offensive line struggled to start the season, did get better. But honestly, injuries and lack of talent were one of the reasons why Marcus Satterfield really struggled. Now, the play calling was not the best either for him, specifically in the red zone, but hopefully that can turn around. And they are adding a co-offensive coordinator to this coaching staff, and Glenn Thomas, who will help him out, and we'll get to him later in the video. Now, the defensive coordinator for Nebraska is Tony White, his second year with the Huskers, coming in from Syracuse, and he grades as an A+ defensive coordinator for Nebraska. He inherited a group in 2023 that was the 75th best defense in all of college football, and he turned it to the 11th best in only one season. I mean, Tony White is the real deal, runs a 3-3-5, which means 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 members of the secondary. And yeah, I mean, he's brought out a lot of guys, made them NFLers throughout his career, and he's doing the same thing at Nebraska. Now, Tony White is one of the best defensive coordinators in all of college football, and for that reason, if the Huskers have another strong performance on defense like we'd all expect, he will get a head coaching spot either at the end of this year or the end of next year. That's how good he is. And talking about Tony White just a little bit more, he comes in from Syracuse. He was with them in 2022. And Dino Babers, the past coach with the Orange, he was shocked when Tony White left for Nebraska simply because he thought Tony White was going to get a head coaching spot, not just another DC job. That's how good Tony White is. That's how much of a leader he is. And Matt Rhule was on the phone with multiple athletic directors throughout the offseason, with the athletic director at UCLA, at San Diego State, and he was pitching Tony White to them, saying this should be your next head coach. Of course, both of those programs went in different directions, but Matt Rhule is actively trying to get Tony White a head coaching spot. That is going to be great for him going forward, but Nebraska wants to have him for the foreseeable future. So that is Nebraska's coaching staff, but let's get into some off-season changes for Nebraska, starting off with the offense. But let's go to the coaching staff just in general. They only lost one member of their coaching staff. That was Evan Cooper, just announced earlier this month. He resigned due to personal reasons, but they gained John Butler, who will take over that defensive backs room, a guy who is coming in from the NFL most recently with the Buffalo Bills. He's been in college football before as the defensive coordinator with Penn State, and this is a clear upgrade for Nebraska, although there are some concerns about John Butler and his recruiting from a developmental standpoint. That is going to be big for Nebraska. Again, he's a guy who has so much experience. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Nebraska brings in Glenn Thomas to be the team's quarterbacks coach along with co-offensive coordinator, another guy who's had stints in the NFL. He's had a lot of history with Matt Rhule, and he's going to be big for the development of a young quarterback room. And for that reason, the coaching staff slightly upgraded for the Huskers. Now going over to the quarterback room, this is a no-brainer. Complete upgrade for Nebraska. You lose 2 quarterbacks. Chubba Purdy transferred out, and then Jeff Sims transferred out as well. Both of those guys going over to the West Coast. And you add Dylan Raiola, the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2024, 5-star prospect. And then you get Jalyn Gramstad in that room, who, if you're not familiar with him, he was the NAIA quarterback of the year last year, a guy who just had a bunch of experience and will also add some depth to that room for Nebraska. So again, you lose 2 of the worst quarterbacks in Power 5 football and you gain a 5-star. Clear upgrade for the Huskers. The running back room remains neutral if it improved or if it got worse. You only lose Anthony Grant, who was more of a veteran for you last season for the Huskers. He had about 400 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns. He's been with the team for a couple of years now. And then you add Dante Dowdle going into his second year, who's previously with the Oregon Ducks, had 100 yards in his true freshman campaign, but he's a very raw running back. And for that reason, I don't believe the running back room upgraded too much for Nebraska, but they do return a lot of talent. And of course, we'll get into that as we keep going. The wide receivers upgraded for Nebraska. No question about it. You lose Billy Kemp and Marcus Washington, both guys who graduated for the Huskers. They had a combined 500 yards last year by Nebraska. They brought in some guys as well. Jahmal Banks, coming in from Wake Forest, had 600 yards for the last 2 seasons for the Demon Deacons, and he's going to try to prove to people why he should be an NFL draft pick. And then Isaiah Nair, coming in from Texas. He's also been with Wyoming in the past, and most recently for the Cowboys in 2022, or 2021, he had 1,000 yards receiving, transferred to Texas, and unfortunately just got banged up throughout his career with the Longhorns, and he's hopefully going to turn that around. And then a couple freshman receivers, Ja'Cory Barney, 4-star, Davon Hall, 4-star, Carter Nelson in the tight end room. So that wide receivers room for Nebraska clearly upgraded. Speaking of the tight ends, you only lose one guy, Jake Applegate. He was never going to play for Nebraska. And then, of course, Carter Nelson, top 100 prospect, 4-star, comes in along with some other freshmen. Tight ends slightly upgraded for Nebraska. Last but not least, for the offensive line, also a slight upgrade. You lose Ethan Piper and Norden Newelly, who were both seniors for you, both guards for the Huskers, who graded out to be one of the better for the whole team. But you bring in Micah Mazuka, who's had a bunch of experience at Florida and Baylor, and then an elite freshman class for Nebraska, multiple 4 stars and high 3 stars. So slightly upgraded, and you bring almost everybody back on the offensive line. And of course, we will get into that. Going to the defense now for Nebraska, specifically the defensive line, another slightly upgraded positional group. You lose 2 players here, Roquan Buckley and Blaze Gunnarsson. Again, nothing much to write home about those two. They only had a combined 10 tackles throughout their entire career with Nebraska. But you gain a couple freshmen to that room for the Huskers, and then just another year of development. Guys like Nash Hutmucker's coming back, Jamari Butler, Ty Robinson, Cameron Lenhart, Prince Uman Mielem. So for that reason, just the development and bringing all of your key players back, it's going to be slightly upgraded. Now, the only room on this entire team that I believe was a slight downgrade for Nebraska was the linebackers, specifically the middle linebackers for the Huskers. Of course, you lose Luke Reimer and Nick Heinrich, both who graduated, and they were leaders on this team for the longest time. That combined for 90 tackles last year, were 2 of the most productive players on the entire team. And then Chief Borders transfers out, who was the spring ball MVP at Nebraska, according to Matt Rhule. He transfers over to Pitt. Randolph Kapai, Eric Fields also leave, guys who really didn't make an impact. But you did gain a couple guys in the portal. Stephon Thompson, one of the more productive players throughout his career, was recently at Syracuse. He was been with Tony White before, the defensive coordinator. There's also Vince Genatone, who transferred in, a guy who's originally from Nebraska, an athletic freak, but don't expect him to play. He's a walk-on for the Huskers, but coming in from Montana, he will likely play later in his career. Vincent Shavers, a guy who was a 4-star recruit, expect him to be in the mix to start this year for the Huskers, and then a couple other freshmen. So very slight downgrade for Nebraska. You just lose a lot of production, but there's still a lot of talent for the linebackers. Going now to the corners, I gave this a due or to be determined grade. You lose Quentin Newsome, who's been your starting cornerback the last 2 seasons. Ethan Nation, who was likely going to be a starter this season, is no longer with the team as of this recording. Tamon Linham transfers to Pitt, and then Javier Morton transfers out as well. And you bring in a couple guys. Bly Hill, who transfers in from St. Francis, an FCS school. Now, he did get injured in spring ball. He likely won't be the starter to start this season. But they add him, and then they add Sear Wright, a transfer from USC, a guy who was previously a 4-star recruit in the class of 2021, but has had some off-the-field issues and hasn't been with the Trojans for over a year. And then a couple other freshmen to this class, guys like Mario Buford, Larry Tarver, Evan Taylor, all 4-star prospects. So pretty good class there, but to be determined for Nebraska. And again, we will get into the secondary, but this is just the off-season changes list. Going to the safeties now for Nebraska. Omar Brown leaves, one of your more productive players last year, second in the team in tackles, and then Corey Collier transfers out. They didn't really add anybody to this safety room, but they did get health. Marquez Buford, who was almost all of last year, is completely healthy, and for that reason, only a neutral grade for the safeties. Last but not least, the special teams. Clear upgrade for Nebraska. You only lose your long snapper, Marco Ortiz, but the main thing there is the kicker room is getting better for Nebraska. Tristan Alvano was one of the worst kickers in all of Power 5 football. Matt Rhule understood that, and he brought in 2 guys, John Hull, who transfers in, 5-star kicker, and then Nico Otto Manelli, who was a 4-star kicker out of high school. So those are the offseason changes for Nebraska. Now let's talk about these positional groups in detail, starting off with the quarterback room. So Dylan Raiola will be the starting quarterback for Nebraska this year, of course, coming in from Buford High School, the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2024. And looking around the country, he is going to be one of the only freshmen to start on day 1 at that quarterback spot. And throughout his high school career, he had over 8,000 yards in the air, 88 touchdowns. And last year, throughout his senior campaign, get this, 34 touchdowns and only 1 interception. He is the real deal, and he's already getting comparisons to Patrick Mahomes. Again, he has that arm strength. He has that build, listed at 6'3", 220 pounds. But what really impresses me about Dylan Raiola, and something I've talked about all offseason long, is that he is such a smart quarterback for his age. I've never seen a quarterback throughout my film studies who has as good of a pocket presence in progressions as he did throughout his senior year. A lot of times, these high school quarterbacks, they only have 1 or 2 progressions, then they run and try to get out of bounds. He had about 3-4 progressions, and he had great pocket presence where, okay, he'd roll outside the pocket, and a lot of times these undisciplined quarterbacks, okay, they try to get that yardage through their legs. Dylan Raiola would scramble to the left or right-hand side, and he'd keep his eyes downfield to find that extra yardage, to find his open receiver. Again, that's something that you don't see from these young quarterbacks. And again, he's very smart. He steps up in the pocket. Honestly, a lost trait in some of these younger guys. For that reason, he's just going to be a star in the making for Nebraska. And you can see that little award by his name. I believe he's going to be a freshman All-American by the time the season is over. But looking at the depth for Nebraska in that quarterback room, of course, Jalyn Gramstad there, who transfers into Nebraska there on the right-hand side. He's going to be the third-string quarterback for Nebraska. I want to talk about him first, though, because he is a senior. He was the NAIA, quarterback of the year. He won a national title. He won a championship throughout his high school days. So, I mean, this dude is a straight winner. He's a dual threat type of guy. He had 1,000 yards on the ground, of course, with about 3,600 yards on the air, 35 touchdowns. So this is a guy who is very talented. He's a winner. It's just about him getting to campus as soon as possible, learning the playbook, learning the speed of the game, and we'll see if he can give Heinrich Haarberg a run for his money at that quarterback 2 spot. But speaking about Heinrich Haarberg, now, last year was, let's just call it what it is, not very good for him. You look at the stats, a little bit under 1,000 yards in the air, 7 touchdowns. He also had 7 interceptions. So the thing about Heinrich Haarberg is he has great arm strength. He honestly has some upside because he is a dual threat quarterback. The problem with him is that he is not a smart quarterback. He struggles with progressions time and time again. I mean, you watch him on film. He'll have 1 or 2 reads at best, and then he'll try to run and make something happen. He cannot read defenses at a Big Ten level. He does not know the speed of the game. And for that reason, when you watch Heinrich Haarberg in the Maryland game from last year, the Michigan State game from last year, Matt Rhule simplified the playbook to best fit his game and really not to put Heinrich Haarberg in harm's way. For that reason, Nebraska never really had an explosive offense because they didn't trust Haarberg throwing the ball over 15, 20 yards in the air. Now, with that being said, Haarberg still has some upside. He was improved a little bit throughout spring ball, but all of the development that mainly happens in quarterbacks is in that first year or second year on campus. Heinrich Haarberg is going into his 4th year on campus. There's really not too much he's going to learn about this offense that he hasn't already learned. So I don't expect him to develop too much. For that reason, he only gets a rating of 69 for Nebraska, but again, hopefully he can take that step, and it's going to be interesting to see if he battles Jalyn Gramstad to be that quarterback 2 for Nebraska. Now, looking at the depth for that quarterback room, you have Daniel Kaelin, 4-star quarterback, true freshman. He's going to redshirt, no problem about that. Guy who was in the Elite 11 finals last year, so definitely is a very high potential. And then Luke Longville, walk-on. Hopefully, for Nebraska fans' purposes, he will not play for the Huskers at all this year. But that's the quarterback room. Now let's go to the backfield, the running backs for the Huskers. And here we go. This is a really good room for Nebraska. Starting off with who I believe will be the more of a bell cow starting running back, Emmett Johnson, who gets a rating of 80 for the Huskers. Now, this guy I talked about all offseason long as performing the best throughout the spring, performing the best throughout winter conditioning. And if you just listen to Matt Rhule talking about Emmett Johnson, he gushes over how good EJ is going to be, that he thinks he's going to be an NFL draft pick. Now, Emmett Johnson is a late riser type of running back. Now, he was not really recruited throughout his high school days until his senior year of high school, where he was the Minnesota Player of the Year. He ran for about 3,000 yards. And last year for Nebraska, he stepped up when there was a bunch of injuries in that room, had 400 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's going to make another jump. Some of the depth in that room includes Gabe Erving, who I actually gave a little bit of a higher rating at an 81. And this is just because Gabe Erving, when he is healthy, he is a very productive running back. But that's the only problem with Gabe Erving. Every single year of his career with Nebraska, he's going into year 4, he has been injured and has not played the entire season. Last year, he was the day 1 starter, had 200 yards and a touchdown, but once again, got injured and did not finish the season. But if he is healthy for Nebraska, which we expect him to be by the start of the year, he will definitely be in the mix along with Emmett Johnson to start. And yeah, it's all about him staying healthy at this point in his career. Same thing, honestly, with Rahmir Johnson. Now, Rahmir also got injured for the entire year last season, only had 65 yards on the ground. But what I love about Rahmir Johnson, he's a very veteran running back going into year 6 with Nebraska. He is the best pass pro running back on the team for the Huskers. Now, what does that mean? He's the best pass catching running back for Nebraska. He's the best getting balls out of the backfield. But not only that, he is the best blocker, hands down, for Nebraska, again, shedding a block for his quarterback. So Rahmir Johnson will absolutely be a part of this offense for the Huskers. And Glenn Thomas, our new co-offense coordinator, he likes to get running backs involved. So expect Rahmir Johnson to really have an increased role with his last year of eligibility. Also in that running back room, you have Dante Dowdle. I put it a 76 overall. Now, I like Dante Dowdle and his upside. I just think he's a very, very raw player. Only 100 yards last year for Oregon as a true freshman. And when you rewatch those Oregon games, he burned his red shirt. He absolutely should not have burned his red shirt because Dan Lanning put him in on basically when the game was already won against lower level Pac-12 schools and FCS opponents. So that was really only when Dante Dowdle got in the ball game. For that reason, they burned his red shirt. He does have a very high ceiling. He was a 4-star coming out of high school, but more of a power back. Expect him to get in the ball game, when Nebraska needs 1 or 2 yards. Quentin Ives is also in that room, second-year player for Nebraska, 3-star out of high school, and he's going to be a guy who will be in the mix to return kicks and punts for Nebraska. He has a good upside as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets some legit run at running back. Now, let's go to the wide receiver room for Nebraska, and man, oh man, is this going to be fun to talk about. Of course, Jahmal Banks headlines that room, listed as a 92 overall. You see that award next to his name. You see that NFL next to his name. I believe this guy is going to be an all Big Ten caliber player along with an NFL draft pick this spring. Now, Jahmal Banks last year for the Demon Deacons, of course, transferring in from Wake Forest, had 650 yards and 4 touchdowns. He basically had the exact same stat line in 2022. And he's a guy who, if he had better quarterback play last year, he would already be in the NFL. He graded out as one of the best wide receivers in all of the ACC, and he's 6'4", 205 pounds. He's just a go up and get a jump ball type of guy. Yes, he's not very speedy. He doesn't have a great run after the catch, but that doesn't matter. He's a traditional wide receiver X. If you throw the ball up to him, he'll bring it down. Has some of the best route running and overall hands I've ever seen from a prospect. So really like Jahmal Banks. He's going to be around that 1,000-yard marker this year for Nebraska, and honestly a security blanket for a true freshman quarterback. Isaiah Neyor is up next in that receiver room at an 81 overall, and you can see that health by his name. Again, this guy is just got hit by the injury bug time and time again in his career. He broke out for Wyoming in 2021, had 1,000 yards as a sophomore, transferred over to the Longhorns, and just got injured. I mean, he tore his ACL. He got injured once again last year, barely played. And for that reason, there's a lot of question mark around Isaiah Neyor, but he's so talented. He's probably going to start for Nebraska at wide receiver Z. And my favorite thing about Isaiah Neyor is that he is a great mix of speed and size. Let's at 6'3", but he runs about a 4'4". He has a great run after the catch ability, a nice little juke move, a nice spin move. And yeah, if he is healthy for Nebraska and has complete confidence in his body, he's going to be a difference maker. Jalyn Lloyd will start in the slot for Nebraska this year. And man, do I love me some Jalyn Lloyd. Listed at 5 foot tall, or 5 foot 10 inches, 160, and last year in his true freshman year had about 240 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns. He's just a deep ball threat. They would run one particular play with Jalyn Lloyd, which is basically an option pass, and he would be open every single time. Now, Jalyn Lloyd, he runs a legit 4.240. He's one of the fastest players in America. He runs track, and yeah, I mean, he is going to take another big jump this year for Nebraska. I expect him to have that good of a year where he's going into his junior campaign and he's regarded as one of the best players in the country, period. So Jalyn Lloyd there for the wide receivers. Now, as our starting tight end, it's going to be Thomas Fidone. Now, Thomas Fidone is a very interesting case, a guy who was a 4-star coming out of high school. He had 260 yards last year for Nebraska, 4 touchdowns, but he's been hit by the injury bug time and time again. His true freshman year, he tore his ACL. In his sophomore year, he tore his other ACL. So he's just been fine to get on the field for Nebraska, was finally healthy last year. He was a difference maker, but you want him to take that next step. All right, what he did last year was good. It wasn't great. You want him to revert to what he was or what he was projected to be coming out of high school. He was the number 1 tight end in the country. He was in the same class as Brock Bowers. That should put things into perspective on how highly he was regarded, and hopefully he can have that year that we all expect him to. So those are the stars for Nebraska in the receiving core. Looking at the depth, you see Malachi Coleman there, 77 overall, a guy who's another track star for Nebraska, runs about a 4.3 40, lists at 6'4". He was a 4-star coming out of high school. And for him, it's all about staying healthy as well. He got banged up at the end of last year. He was out for all of winter conditioning and spring practice. Hopefully he can hit fall ball with the ground running and take that jump. Ja'Cory Barney, true freshman 4-star, a guy who was super hyped up out of high school and out of spring ball. Man, he was the spring game MVP, in my opinion, had a huge kick return along with a receiving touchdown. He'll be in the mix to start this year. You also have Isaiah Garcia, Castaneda, a senior, just kind of a depth piece, and then Janarian Bonner moving back to wide receiver. He is a guy who's another 4-star coming out of high school, and hopefully he can take a jump. Some other guys not mentioned that receiver core. You have Alex Bullock, another depth piece, senior, and then a couple other freshmen. So very deep receiver room for the first time in a long time. You're hoping those top-end players can really produce. Now going to the depth for the tight ends, you have Carter Nelson there at a 75 overall. Carter Nelson is the real deal, man. I mean, coming out of high school, he was a top 100 recruit 4-star, one of the most coveted players in America. Now, my main concern with Carter Nelson is simply the fact that he is not big enough to play tight end right away. Now, he's only about 220, 225 pounds. In order to be a Big Ten tight end, you need to be about 250 pounds. So if Carter Nelson does find the field this year for Nebraska, it will be as basically a hybrid tight end wide receiver lining up basically as a wideout. Also in that room, Nate Borkature, he started a lot in the past for Nebraska. He's a junior now, listed at 73 overall. More of a blocking tight end, but a guy who will absolutely be on the field a lot. Matt Rhule likes to have about 2 tight ends on the field most of the time in his offense. Luke Lindenmeyer, another blocking tight end, listed at a 67 overall, and then Ismail Smith-Flores, 67 overall. More of a high upside type of guy, but again, still trying to get weight on him as well. So that is the receiving core for Nebraska. And real quick, these are my ratings. Again, nobody else's ratings. So you see Jahmal Banks with the 92. That's what I believe he should be rated because he's that good of a player. All right, over to the offensive line, the trenches for Nebraska. This is also going to be incredibly fun to talk about. Now, if we talk about this offensive line, you have to discuss the history of it. And not the old school 90s history. I mean the last couple years. When Matt Rhule inherited this offensive line, it was one of the worst in Power 5 football. Let's just call it what it is. It was the worst in Power 5 football. Last year, it really struggled at the end of the year, but Donovan Raiola, our offensive line coach, molded it to be one of the better in the Big Ten. Now they're trying to take that jump to a top 20 unit in all of college football, and man, this is a formidable starting 5. Let's go left to right here. Teddy Prohaska at left tackle, going into his 4th year with Nebraska. And man, I mean, look at the height there. 6'9", 300, about 25 pounds. He started 11 games for Nebraska and has been on the bench, or has just played in general 18 games. For that reason, he gets an 80 overall. But another guy who's had a lot of health concerns throughout his career, got banged up in 2022, got banged up again last year. You're hoping he can stay healthy, but he has a very high upside for the Huskers, no doubt. Really good in pass pro, and you're hoping he can take a jump. Justin Evans is going to start at left guard for Nebraska. He's my pick there, going into his third year with Nebraska. And he's just a guy who I love his upside. He started 5 games for the Huskers, really good in pass pro. He graded out as the second best pass pro O-lineman for Nebraska. Now, not as great in the running game, but just the fact that he started time and time again in his second year for the Huskers is only going to mean good things for his upside. He also flexes to play center. So, love Justin Evans Jenkins. He's honestly going to be in the mix to be potentially an All-Big Ten pick. Speaking of center, let's go to who I would believe is the best offensive lineman for Nebraska in 2024, Ben Scott. When you look at the games played and games started, he's played in 29 games throughout his career, started 28 of them, and he's going to win some awards this year for Nebraska. He's going to be an NFL draft pick. He's just a rock. I mean, he's not a guy necessarily who you talk about too much. You don't really talk about centers, but, I mean, he does everything right. He's great in pass pro. He's great in the running game. He got all Big Ten honors last year as an honorable mention. He's absolutely going to be in the mix again to be one of the best in the country. So Ben Scott, definitely a guy who is awesome there interior for Nebraska. But let's go to right guard, who I believe is going to start for Nebraska. Micah Mazzccua coming in from Florida. This is a guy who is also a senior. This is a very old offensive line for Nebraska. And one thing that you see about Micah Mazzccua, he plays best when the lights are the most bright. When he was with Florida last year, his best games were against the best opponents in the Big Ten. Now, very developed in the pass pro, a little bit. He needs to work on a little bit in the running game. Now, Matt Rhule said he still needs to develop just slightly, but his upside is phenomenal. Another guy who I believe will be an NFL draft pick. He was actually projected to be an NFL draft pick this spring, decided not to enter, but to enter the portal and go to the Huskers. Last but not least, we have Bryce Benhart starting at right tackle. Pencil him in there. 81 overall, a guy who has started 41 games for Nebraska. That's tied for the most all-time of any Nebraska tackle. And honestly, we talk about Bryce Benhart. He has not been the most popular player throughout his career for the Huskers. I mean, he started almost since day one when he got on campus. And he really struggled. I mean, did not really have any technique in the pass pro. His hands needed a lot of work. His footwork were terrible. But last year was awesome for Bryce Benhart. He was significantly improved in both the pass pro and the running game. And he graded out as the third best lineman for the Huskers. Expect him to take another jump and try to prove to scouts why he should go to the NFL. Now, this is a really good starting lineup for Nebraska in the trenches. The depth is even better. You have Turner Corcoran, a senior who was a big-time recruit. If he's on the bench for you, that's only going to mean good things. Now, Turner Corcoran struggled a lot through his career. He plays tackle and guard, but you really feel good about him on the bench. Henry Letufsky is going to fight throughout fall practice to start. He's going to battle Justin Evans Jenkins and Micah Mazzccua. I wouldn't actually be surprised if he does get a starting role. I love Henry Letufsky. I think he has a great upside. So another guy you feel very confident playing. Really, really good upside there as well. Gunnar Gatula, Sam Sledge, Jacob Hood, all younger players who have great upsides. Gunnar Gatula almost didn't redshirt last year for Nebraska. That's how good he was as a true freshman. He will get some run. Jacob Hood was a 4-star coming out of high school, transferred from Georgia last year. And then besides those guys, you just have some more younger guys with some good upside. Gibson Pyle, Grant Brooks, who's a 4-star, President Mo, who's a 4-star. So very good offensive line for Nebraska. It's about 10 deep. You'd feel comfortable with about 10 or 9 guys starting for Nebraska. That's how good it is. So definitely a very improved offensive line for the Huskers. All right, that is the offense for Nebraska in 2024. You look at that rushing attack. I give it an 83 overall grade. Now, the reason why it's not any higher is simply because Dylan Raiola is not a running quarterback. Now, if Heinrich Haarberg was starting for Nebraska, that'd probably get bumped up a little bit because say what you want about Haarberg, but he is a darn good runner of the football. But you feel good about Emmett Johnson. You feel good about the run stopping or the run pass, the run ability of this offensive line. So for that reason, an 83 overall for the rushing attack. And then looking at the passing attack through the air, an 85 overall, just a little bit better. This wide receiver core is very, very good. And Dylan Raiola, number one recruit in the country, is going to take over. The only thing I'd say, it should be a little bit higher, But this offensive line is more geared toward the running game than it is the pass pro. And for that reason, only an 85 passing grade. So this offense in general gets an 84, one of the better in the Big Ten, and it's going to be improved throughout the season. But with that being said, it's time to look at the black shirts, the defensive line for Nebraska. Let's go to the number one positional group on the team, the defensive line. And man, is that great to look at here. Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmacher, Jamari Butler, Princewell, Umanmi-Ellen. So Nebraska runs a 3-3-5, which basically means 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and then 5 members of the secondary. Now, I did put Princewell, Umanmi-Ellen on this graphic, even though he is a linebacker, because he's basically a true pass rusher. He plays that jack position, which is more of a pass rusher all the time. So he will absolutely be in the mix on this defensive line for the Huskers. But let's just go left to right. Ty Robinson, a 90 overall for Nebraska last year. He had 29 tackles and 4 TFLs going into his senior year, a player who I absolutely believe will win awards when it's all said and done. Now, Ty Robinson, one thing that jumps out statistically is that he only had 1 sack for Nebraska last year in 2023. But when you dive deeper, he had the highest quarterback hurry rate out of anybody on the team. So he actually does very good in the pass rush department. It's just about getting to the quarterback. He's a little bit too big, if you ask me, at 6'6", 310 pounds. A lot of his athleticism that he had coming out of high school is no longer with him. But again, he's good at getting to the quarterback. And honestly, when the pocket breaks down and he's getting to him, even if he doesn't get the sack, he's opening up opportunities for Nash to get to the quarterback, for Jamari Butler to get to the quarterback. So again, Ty Robinson, very good in the pass rush department. Hopefully he gets more sacks. And then him in the running game, he's one of the best in the country, period. End of discussion. Now, interior. At nose tackle / D tackle for the Huskers as a 0 technique, Nash Hutmacher is going to start. Number 0, the polar bear, a complete fan favorite. And yeah, I mean, he is unbelievable. Had 4.5 sacks last year and 40 tackles for the Huskers. That stat line is almost unheard of for an interior lineman, specifically a 0 technique. That's how dominant he is. He dominates double teams. He gets to the quarterback, and he opens up opportunities for his teammates. He's going to be a high NFL draft pick, no doubt about it, in the fall. Jamari Butler will start opposite of Ty Robinson on the defensive line. He led the team in sacks last year with 5.5, and then also had 34 tackles for Nebraska. For that reason, I'm going to give him an 86 overall. Now, Jamari Butler is the best pass rushing player on the team, has a great arsenal of a quick swim move, a nice little bull rush, a nice spin move to get to the quarterback, and he has just a great upside, great athleticism. Jamari Butler, man, he's going to be a guy who really flourishes this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets up to about maybe 8 sacks, 9 sacks for Nebraska, might even get in that double-digit range. So really love Jamari Butler. And then looking at Princewell Umanmi-Ellen, again, he's a linebacker for the Huskers, but he plays jack, which is hybrid defensive line, hybrid linebacker. And he, last year for Nebraska, in his true freshman campaign, 24 tackles, 4 TFLs. He got all American freshman honors. He was a force to coming out of high school. I love Princewell Umanmi-Ellen. I compare him to Randy Gregory all the time. He has that legit potential to be a first-round draft pick, so expect him to boom. And then looking at the depth in this defensive line for the Huskers, Cameron Lenhard, I believe, will be on the bench, at least to start the season, at an 82 overall. Now, to put this in perspective, how good this defensive line is for Nebraska. Cameron Lenhard, when I made my video about my top 10 players for Nebraska, he was my 10th best player, and he's on the bench. That's how good this defensive line is. That's how good the depth is. But Cameron Lenhard will come in the game a lot because they rotate that defensive line a lot. So really not too big of a deal that he's not technically starting. You also have Riley Van Poppel, another true sophomore at a 79 overall. I love Riley Van Poppel, another 4-star out of high school. And I said this before about him, and I'll say it again. We love Nash Hutmacher. We believe he's going to be a high NFL draft pick. I believe when Riley Van Poppel's career is over, he will be even better than what Nash is right now. That's how much I love Riley Van Poppel, and I believe in his upside. Then also in that defensive line, you have MJ Sherman, who is basically a jack, Mekhi Gabayer, who was a jack, James Williams, who is a defensive end, coming out of JUCO, Kai Wallen also in the mix. So the depth there, I mean, it's not too great after you get past Cameron Lenhard and Riley Van Poppel, But again, you feel good about guys like James Williams and Kai Wallen making a step up. And then Elijah Judy, who transferred in from Texas A&M last year, is also a great pass rusher. So the depth, honestly, I'll revert that. It is pretty good for Nebraska. But that starting lineup, that's top 10 in America. That's what you should take away from this defensive line for the Huskers. Now, let's go to the linebacker core for the Black Shirts. Who's going to start there? And we have Buda Wright, Stephon Thompson, and Princewill Umanmielen once again. Again, we'll just repeat him. But talking about Buda Wright / Javin Wright first, this is a guy who's going into his senior campaign, and he just has phenomenal upside. Time and time again, he's been injured in his career. He had blood clots early on. He tore some ligaments in his leg. But last year, for the first time in his life, really, he was healthy, and he was second in the team in tackles with 51, along with 2 interceptions. Now, what I love about Buda Wright is that he's basically a hybrid linebacker / member of the secondary. He used to play rover for Nebraska, but he's only about 215, 220 pounds. Listed at 6'5". He can do just about as everything. And man, I mean, he's great in the secondary, and he's great bringing down running back. So love Buda Wright. He's going to take another jump this year to 79 overall. But the starter inside is going to be Stephon Thompson. There's a little bit of a health concern by his name. The reason is he has got banged up throughout his career with the Syracuse Orange. He barely played a couple of the last 4 years. So for that reason, there is an injury mark. And it should be mentioned, when he got to campus for Nebraska in the spring, he was not in football shape. He was a little bit out of weight, but that should not be a problem throughout the fall. He's going to start for Nebraska. But just talking about Stephon Thompson's upside, as an 86 overall, had 52 tackles last year, 4 TFLs. He's been one of the more productive players throughout his career in all of ACC football. If he can get back to that level, he's going to be a stud. And then just talking about Princewill Umanmielen one more time, because I love him so much as a player. Again, he's basically a Randy Gregory hybrid 2.0 type of guy. And yeah, he's going to make his presence felt. I believe he's going to start at Jack. But talking about that Jack spot, MJ Sherman will also be in the mix to start there. He's a senior. Now, MJ Sherman, I'm going to just be completely honest with you, is one of the most overrated transfers in the history of Nebraska football, because last year he transferred in from Georgia. He was a special team standout for the Bulldogs, but he really never played for them. And all these Nebraska fans were saying, MJ Sherman's going to have 10 sacks, 11 sacks. He's going to be a difference maker. MJ Sherman, in 2024 for Nebraska, he started some of the year at Jack. He did not play at all to what we expected. Last year for Nebraska, he only had 16 tackles and 1.5 sacks. And he got benched for Chief Borders and Princewill Umanmielen. So MJ Sherman, you're hoping he can finally break out. But again, he's a senior. A lot of times these seniors, they don't break out. They can't break out because they've only developed so much. But he will absolutely be in the mix there at Jack. Mekhi Gabair will be in the mix. He's my guy. I love him, man. A guy who plays Jack, plays inside. I mean, he's coming out of New Jersey. I believe this is now his 4th year with Nebraska. I mean, time flies, but he will be a huge difference maker. He's probably going to start at some point this year. John Bullock, a veteran in that room, had a bunch of tackles for Nebraska at 50 in 2023. Nothing really to write home about him, but he's just a guy who's just a feisty Midwest linebacker, was a former walk-on. So you like John Bullock there. And then Vincent Shavers, who is a true freshman, has got a lot of anticipation throughout spring ball. He will be in the mix start as well. Basically, Levante David 2.0. Love him. Some other guys there I'll mention real quickly. Jalen Rogers, going into his 3rd year with Nebraska. Willis McGahee, true freshman. Vincent Genatone, I don't expect him to play. Transfer from Montana, he's a walk-on. And then Gage Stanger, another guy I just don't expect to play there as well. But the linebacker room, honestly, a little bit of a lack of depth, but you like those first couple guys. Let's go to the secondary now, starting off with the cornerbacks. Of course, we'll get to the safeties in that rover spot. Now, the corners is a position I've talked about extensively over the offseason, more particularly my concern with the corners. But there's one guy I'm not concerned about. That's Tommy Hill. Now, you just see the stats there for him. 6 PBUs, 4 INTs in 2023. And yeah, he's a guy who I believe is going to get all Big Ten honors. He's going to be a high NFL draft pick, day 2, maybe even a day 1 type of guy. That's how good Tommy Hill is. But talking about him on the field, again, he's a true man-to-man corner, really good speed, aggressiveness, ball skills. He has it all. For that reason, he's got comparisons to some of the best corners in the country. People need to give him some respect. He's the best player, or one of the best players on the team for Nebraska, period, end of discussion. On the other side, at the cornerback spot, Zaire Wright will start for Nebraska at least to begin the year. Now, he's transferring in from USC. He didn't play for them last year, but he started the majority of the season in 2022. And this is a guy that if you talk to Trojan fans, they were very sad to see him leave. They thought he had a very high upside. They thought he had a legit first-round NFL draft pick potential. But again, just really didn't play last year. We don't really know why. He's had some off-the-field issues. He has a career in acting, and people wonder that he cares a little bit more about that than he does football. But the fact that he transferred from Nebraska should indicate that he's all about getting better on the field rather than his career in that acting department. But has a good upside. Again, you're hoping he can, hit the ground running and honestly not give that spot back when Bly Hill comes back from injury, who is probably going to start when he comes back, though. Let's be real. Bly Hill is transferring in from St. Francis, was one of the best corners in FCS football. I give him a 77 overall. Now, him and Zaire Wright, they're two different corners. Bly Hill is a little bit more of a nickel corner. He's 6'3". He doesn't have the best 40 time in the world, but man, is he a great tackler, and he can really do it all. Zaire Wright's more of a man-to-man boundary corner, only 6 foot tall. But again, they're two different corners, but Bly Hill, Matt Rhule was raving about him in spring ball. Expect him to be in the mix there. Now let's go to the starting safeties for the Huskers. Man, do I love these two. Marquez Buford, 83 overall for Nebraska. Now, this is a guy who got banged up last year, barely played for the Huskers, but he started the majority games in 2022, and was he a difference maker? Now, for the Huskers last year, I believe he only played in 4 games, and he still had 18 tackles and 3 TFLs. That's how much of a difference maker he is. A guy who's great tackling, but also just better in that pass situation, going up and getting jump balls, bringing them down for interceptions. Great ball skills, great in zone coverage. So you feel good about Marquez Buford finally being healthy. And speaking of healthy, Deshaun Singleton is back as well. He got injured in the 5th game last season, had 19 tackles and 2.5 TFLs, and he's just a hard hitter. Cam Chancellor type of safety for Nebraska. He will lay the boom on you, and for that reason, he gets an 82 overall. I believe he's going to be an NFL draft pick this spring. That's how much I like him. So, yep, he is in his last year. Senior Marquez Buford will probably be back in 2025. Isaac Gifford, the last guy who will start in the secondary, plays the rover position. So if you do not know what that means, it's basically hybrid linebacker slash safety slash nickel corner. He basically does it all. And last year he led the team in tackles with 86, 8 PBUs. And he's a guy that if you ask Matt Rhule, if you ask Tony White, they'll say Isaac Gifford's the best player in the team. Now, I'll be honest about Isaac Gifford. I love him in the tackling department. He is probably the best tackler in our secondary on our team, period, man. He has led the boom time and time again. Now, last year he did struggle a lot in the secondary, specifically in passing downs. There was a couple of times in Colorado where he just got burnt by a guy like Travis Hunter, Xavier Weaver, just ran right past him. He's not great in man-to-man. He's not really great in short zone coverages. He did not have a good game against Michigan. But I will say this about Isaac Gifford. He got significantly better in passing situations as the year progressed. So hopefully he can take another jump. But again, talking about him in the running game, talking about him just as a tackling safety, he's about as good as it gets. So Isaac Gifford, just keep him out of man coverage and he'll be fine. Also in that safety room, Malcolm Hartzog at a 79 overall moves to free safety. Now this is where I pat myself on the back just a little bit because I've always thought Malcolm Hartzog should be a safety. He was never what he used to be. He never was a corner, right? That's never should have been his true position. If you watched him, let's just say in his freshman campaign for the Huskers, he had a lot of interceptions, 4 interceptions, and people said, oh, he's a ball hawk. He's a man-to-man corner. Like, no. Malcolm Hartzog, the only reason why he got those interceptions his freshman year was because he was ball hawking to try to get picks, but he'd get burnt time and time again because he was looking for the ball over the receiver. Now, I like him being a ball hawk at safety because you can get away with it a little bit more in zone coverage. So a little bit of a good positional change there. He's not very tall. He's not a great tackler. That's the only thing I'm worried about him at safety. But some other guys in the corner room, Dwight Boodle, second-year player. Larry Tarver, love him, my favorite true freshman corner. He'll be in the mix. Mario Buford, another 4-star. And then not too great of a depth after that. So that is the secondary for Nebraska, but those starters are pretty good for the Huskers. Hoping everybody can stay healthy. So let's look at the whole defense for the Black Shirts. This run-stopping D gets a 90 overall grade. That's one of the best in the country. This defensive line's legit, guys, but the linebacker core, the safety core, Isaac Gifford, they all push this to a 90 overall run-stopping defense. And pass coverage, a little bit worse at an 85. That's still a very good grade. I just have concerns about the second cornerback for Nebraska and that safety depth just a little bit as well. But overall, an 88 overall defense, that's going to grade out as one of the best in all of football. That's definitely a top 20. Now, is this defense top 10? We don't know yet. I still have concerns about the linebacker depth and the secondary depth. It could be top 10, but it's definitely going to be top 20. All right, let's look real quick here at the special teams for Nebraska. The starting kicker, as of right now, will be Tristan Alvano, his second year with the Huskers. Last year was, let's just call it what it is, a struggle fest for him. Only completed 60% of his field goals. He made all of his PAs, however. For that reason, he gets a 70 overall. Listen, say what you want about Tristan Alvano. One thing you don't have to be concerned about is his leg strength. I mean, he can boot at about 65, 70 yards. He has a cannon of a leg. It's just that accuracy. It's just about getting that jitters out. If he can figure out that part of his game, he's going to be one of the better kickers in the country. But we really can't wait. We can't have another season like what he did last year, or else he's never going to play again. Because, I mean, that's just the way it is at the kicker position. The starting punter for Nebraska will likely be Brian Buschini in his senior year. Brian Buschini gets a 74 overall. Honestly, I was tempted to put him a little bit lower. He would grade it out as the 15th worst punter in all of football last year. He was not great. He had a couple shanks here and there, really could not down a ball inside the 20-yard line. And that was just a stark contrast given the fact of how good he was in 2022. He was actually one of the best punters in the country that year. So he went from one of the best to one of the worst. That's just kind of how special teams are sometimes. That same thing happens in the NFL. So hopefully Brian Buschini can bounce back. He's going to start. And then long snapper for Nebraska, 82 overall. You never really have to worry about long snapper. Camden Watucky, he was a 5-star LS coming out of high school. He's going to be just fine. And then that kicker depth specifically, there is going to be a kicker battle throughout fall ball. You have John Hull, who was a 5-star transfer, and Nico Otto-Ellie, who was a 4-star high school kicker coming in. They're going to try to battle Alvano, but my prediction is that Alvano likely starts, at least to begin the year. But I will say this about Alvano. He will be on a short lease for Nebraska. If he struggles against UTEP, if he struggles against Colorado, Matt Rhule will pull him this year, no question about it. So that is the team for the Huskers, all of my ratings. Let's get into the overall strengths and weaknesses of this squad. Now, the strengths are pretty self-explanatory. That defensive line is one of the best in all of America. The offensive line is going to be a top 30 unit as well. You love that safety room with Isaac Gifford, with Deshaun Singleton, with Marquez Buford, with Malcolm Hartzog. That's deep. I mean, those guys are all NFL draft picks, so definitely good safety room. And honestly, going back to the culture, man, this culture of the team is just so improved. And that'll win you football games. And I'm going to give you a quick example. A lot of people, they're like, oh, culture, how does that relate to wins? The culture in the Scott Frost era was so terrible. Right, I go back to the game in 2021 when we played Iowa in Memorial Stadium. We were up big in that football game. Iowa blocked one punt from Nebraska and brought it back for a touchdown. Nebraska was still up by double digits, but you could hear a pin drop in that stadium. Every single player on the sideline for Nebraska had their head down. They were still up by 2 possessions, and everybody knew they were going to lose because they didn't believe in themselves. That changes here with Matt Rhule. Again, this team loves each other. They love the coaching staff. They believe in our mission. That's going to relate to some wins, no question about it. The only strength besides those 4, in my opinion, the running back depth for the first time, the depth is really good. I mean, you feel comfortable with 4 guys starting there, maybe even 5 guys. You know, Emmett Johnson, Ramir Johnson, Gabe Irving, Dante Dow, or even Quentin Ives. All of those guys are very good backs. The only problem there in that running back room, I will say, there's just not a top-end guy. There's not a player, at least as of right now, that you would think, could be a all-Big Ten type of player. The weaknesses for Nebraska. Quarterback depth is the number one. If Dylan Raiola somehow gets injured, God forbid he gets benched, which, okay, he's never going to get benched, but he gets injured. it's DEFCON 5. I mean, it's over, right? Heinrich, Haarberg coming in the game, Jalyn, Gramstad. You do not believe those guys can really win you football games, at least against competent opponents. So that's definitely a concern for the Huskers. Hopefully Raiola stays healthy. The cornerback depth is also a weakness. Again, if Sear Wright goes down or if Blyhill continues to be injured, you're going to likely throw out a starting corner who's a freshman or a second-year player. That should be concerning against how good these wide receivers are in the Big Ten. And then the other weakness I'd say is that tight end room. Yes, you love Fedoni. He's going to be a good tight end, but Nebraska likes to have 2 tight ends on the field at all times. And you look at the depth there. I mean, Borgacher's fine. Carter Nelson won't be a tight end this year. And then after that, it's Luke Lindenmeyer, walk-on, and a bunch of young guys who are true freshmen. So for that reason, I will say the tight end room is a little bit of a weakness, but nothing big there. No problem at all. The X factor for this season, you have 2 for the Huskers. Dylan Raiola. I mean, if he plays at his potential, Nebraska could win about 9-10 games. If he struggles, they might not make a bowl game. That's the X factor. And then last but not least, the late game decision making. I mean, when it comes down to the fourth quarter, Matt Rhule needs to use the clock well, needs to use those timeouts well, trust the special teams to get a clutch field goal, because that's really what killed him last year. I mean, the Maryland, Michigan State game, Wisconsin game, Iowa game, all of them we lost because of our fourth quarter decision making, because of Matt Rhule and his time management. Again, we love Matt Rhule as a head coach. We believe he's a great game manager head coach. I believe he's going to figure that out in 2024. All right, the outlook on the season. Now, the Vegas over-under for Nebraska is 7.5. We have the 7th best odds to win the Big Ten, and then our national title odds are the 31st in the country. You look at the schedule. You have UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa to start off your season in the non-conference. You have Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana. This is a legit 7-0 potential start for the Huskers. Again, you're going to be favored in just about every single one of those games. But after that, it gets rough. You have Ohio State on the road. That's an L. You have UCLA at home. Again, you're going to be a favorite there, but UCLA, they are very talented. I mean, you could compare them a lot to Nebraska in that regard. USC at the Coliseum, probably going to be a loss there. They're going to rebound after a tough 2023. And then Wisconsin, Iowa, 2 teams that you've struggled against a lot over the last decade. So hopefully, for Nebraska fans' purposes, they start off 7-0. But, man, I mean, that back end of that schedule, that's tough for the Huskers. So for that reason, the ceiling for Nebraska, if everything goes right, if Dylan Raiola plays well, if you can win those close games, if the field goal kicking can figure itself out, 10-2 is your ceiling, with losses only to Ohio State and likely to either USC or Wisconsin. That's basically best case scenario. And people forget, if you go 10-2 this year, or in in the modern day of college football, you're going to make that playoff. So Nebraska would be a playoff dark horse in that scenario. Now, the floor for the Huskers, if everything goes wrong, if Dylan Raiola is not the quarterback he should be, 4-8 will likely happen. Now, a lot of Nebraska fans might say, Wilson, 4-8, not with how talented this team is. The only thing I'll say to that is that we've had a talented team the last half decade. That's not the reason we've lost football games. We've lost football games because we've had a bunch of mistakes. We've had in-game turnovers, time management flaws. That happened last year as well. If that happens again, yeah, we could only win 5 games or 4 games. So in that scenario, you'd probably only beat UTEP, Northern Iowa, Illinois at home, and then probably Indiana. So, all right, guys, that is my deep dive for Nebraska football in 2024. Man, oh man, this is going to be a big season for the Huskers, and just going on and talking more a little bit about the season and my expectations for Nebraska, what I believe will actually happen. I will be releasing my record prediction for the Huskers next weekend on Saturday. So I'm releasing this on Saturday. Next Saturday will be my official record prediction. So watch out for that. But talking a little bit about that Vegas over-under, 7.5. I would not touch that. That's my only prediction. I wouldn't touch that. If I was a gambling man, I would not touch that line. But my overall prediction for Nebraska, Jahmal Banks, first one. He's going to be a stud. He's going to be an 1,000-yard receiver for Nebraska. He's going to be the best player on the team. Tommy Hill, he's going to have all Big Ten honors. He will be a day 2 draft pick for Nebraska. This defensive line will establish itself as one of the best in all of college football. Some breakout players I have who I believe are going to just absolutely rise. Vincent Shavers, Ja'Cory Barney is going to be one of those guys. Gibson Pyle on the offensive line, I think will get reps as the year goes on. May or may not burn his red shirt, but will play well when he gets on the field. And then honestly, going back to the secondary, Larry Tarver, Mario Buford, they might get thrown out there early in the secondary, will be pretty good. So those are my predictions for some of those players who I think are going to break out. But honestly, man, I just want to have a productive year where we're in the mix for a lot of these games. We might not win all of them, but if we're playing USC at the Coliseum, or we're playing Ohio State and we're just keeping it a ball game, we're in the game going into the fourth quarter, we might not have to win, but that will show me that we are all just knocking on the door to be one of the more competitive teams in the country. Now, year 2 under Matt Rhule, I expect to take a jump. I expect to win a decent amount of bowl games and go to a bowl. However, I don't think we're going to win 10 games. I don't think we're going to win 11 games. And for that reason, the year 3 jump is going to be even bigger. Year 3, I think, is going to be that season where you look back and say, hey, that was the start of everything. Nebraska is going to be nationally relevant, and we're going to be in the mix for a national title. So year 2 still big, though. And again, next week, I'll be releasing my record prediction and everything that goes along with that. So, all right, guys, I put a lot of work into this video. Again, weeks and weeks of making these graphics, loading up the statistics around everybody, recording. So please hit that like button. It really would help me out. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel. Again, I work super hard on this. I post a video about Nebraska football every single day, and we're keeping it going all fall long. But as always, folks, that'll do it for me here on the Will Simmons Sports Channel. Go Big Red, go Matt Rhule, and see you in the next one.